What you are looking at here is familiar, and yet it's not. It's a Pentium Pro desktop from the 90s, complete with Windows and a mouse and keyboard and a CD drive, but at the same time, it's also incompatible with every DOS program that runs on a regular PC, and instead it has its own set of unique DOS games and programs. Yeah, it's incompatible with the PC. It's completely incapable of running normal PC games, even though it's a Pentium Pro. But yet it has its own game library and its own set of software. This is not a PC. It's an NEC PC-98, and for several decades, this was the most popular platform in Japan. I'm not even kidding. They monopolized the computer market. And yet it has a port of DOS, and yet it has a port of Windows. And the main operating system is a port of DOS or a port of Windows, depending on the era. No, really, that's Windows 98 running on here. Except it's not regular Windows 98, but it's the PC-98 version of Windows 98. Now here's the thing. If you were to look at this computer right now, you would not be mistaken in thinking that it's just a typical PC that I'm hyping up for YouTube. It's got a Pentium Pro. Even though it says PC-98 right here, it's got Windows 98, it's got DirectX, it's got a Pentium Pro. It even lets you run Windows games. At least as well as a Trident video chip will let you. Because the thing with Trident video chips is, if you've ever used them, you kind of know how they are. They're not that great. See, this game does not run that well. Even when all the enemies disappear, it's still not running that well. So yeah, you might be thinking it's just a PC, at least until you open up, MPlayer. And then you play a MIDI file on it, and you wonder why it sounds like garbage. Where is MPlayer at? Let's open up a MIDI file. And you're like, what is this out of tune MIDI file? But it's just a PC, right? And then you open up a DOS box and you notice something else interesting. That ain't MS-DOS. Why is this bottom stuff here? Why is it? Well, here's why. Let's reboot. Let's just reboot into DOS. And then this is where the magic begins, and where the PC-98 shows itself as an interesting platform. And this is why this PC is not your ordinary PC. Watch this. And you're like, oh right, I gotta restart the computer because Windows didn't clear the IRQs right. Yeah, that is the experience of this platform. Alright, take two. Let's see if this works. So, when was the last time you heard an MS-DOS computer sounding like a Sega Genesis or a 90s arcade game? Complete with, with the SSG and FM and PCM samples being driven by a software driver? Exactly. And that's the cool part about the system, or one of the cool parts. And by the way, this isn't VGA either, but it's actually 24 kilohertz video. And you're like, wow, this is a lot more interesting than just some weird PC clone. This was actually a major part of Japanese computing for years and years. This is the PC-98, one of the most interesting platforms you have literally never heard of. No, really. Even the video resolution's not even the same as a PC. 24 kilohertz. But here we go. This is a PC-98, and I think this is interesting. Let's back out of here. So what is the PC-98, and why is it such an interesting platform? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about and discussing in this video, because I think it's worth talking about the PC-98, and I think the best way to start it is with the first video where I essentially talk about a little bit of the backstory of the PC-98 and some of the differences between a PC-98 and a regular old PC. Alright, so once upon a time, let's start off with the history lesson of the PC-98 before I talk about some of the weird hardware features. So in the early 1980s, NEC was riding high. They were making a lot of weird computers for the consumer market and whatnot. They had the PC-6000, which was a low-end home computer that had a following. They had the PC-8001, which was their original computer line for the consumer market, essentially. And it was sort of a home computer slash personal computer. It sold well. Then there was the PC-9801, which was kind of a successor to the 8001, except they sold it side by side. And that was a smashing success. The 8801 went on for years and years. And then NEC released the PC-9801. And the PC-9801 was sort of a boring business computer. It was like the original PC. It didn't do too well, but in a lot of ways it was more technically advanced than the PC. One of the main ways being the screen resolution was 24 kilohertz. The screen resolution was 24 kilohertz, but it also had a pretty cool video system where essentially there were two layers. There was the graphics layer and the text layer, and this was done by having two of the same video chip. And despite that, though, the PC-98 was not a smashing hit as a gaming platform, because everybody had, you know, a PC-88, everybody had these other platforms, and there was no real reason to target a system that had inferior audio and sound capabilities in many ways, especially because the original could only do 8 colors despite having a high resolution. But this all changed in the mid-80s when NEC came out with a few PC-98 models. The first were the PC-9801 VF and VM, with the only difference being the floppy drive size and RAM. And the VF and VM introduced to the GDC chips, which are the video chips, they introduced the GCRG chip, which was the graphics charger. And the graphics charger, from what I've heard, it could manipulate the video output and whatnot. At least that's how I heard it was described as. But that became a popular chip, and lots of games used that. In 1987, NEC released the PC-9801 VX, which featured two things: a 286 processor and the EGC chip replacing the GCRG chip. However, the EGC chip was backwards compatible with the GCRG, and it could run in a GCRG mode, essentially. I think that's kind of how it works. I haven't really read the documentation too well, and it's all in Japanese, unfortunately. So I'm not really sure about how it works, but the EGC has a blitter, and the GCRG does not. It's a confusing name, unlike the EGC. So the thing is, when that chip came out, a lot of games were being made for the PC-98 that in particular used the GCRG chip. There were many that also used the EGC chip, especially for a speed up, but the problem is, documentation on the EGC chip was kind of spotty because only 1 or 2 PC-98 books actually had documentation on it. And in fact, when there was an edition that replaced the 1986 version of the PC-98 programming manual, it actually doesn't have any info on the EGC. However, this supplement book for the 1986 edition has EGC info, and so does some book on PC-98 game dev, which is interesting. But this kind of created an urban legend in Japan that NEC was actually restricting access to how the EGC operated, because it is a lot harder to find information on how the later video subsystems of the PC-98 operate, in particular the ones for the 98GS, the H98. There's a book on it, but it's not scanned, and is really rare from what I've heard. And also the PC-9801. There's some info out there on how to program for it, and there were games made for it, but from what I've heard, they wanted you to use the video driver for that chip instead of actually programming it directly, at least from what I've been able to find. And so it's a little confusing on how to program it compared to the other video chips of the PC-98. But as you can see here, this is that screen resolution I was talking about that even the earliest PC-98 has, where it's 24 kilohertz. Okay, so what killed the PC-98? Two things did. The first is that NEC did not want people cloning the PC-98. Believe it or not, there was actually a clone of the PC-98, and it was made by Epson, and they made several generations of this clone, up until, you know, the Pentium. But the problem is, well, twofold. The first problem is that NEC sued Epson, and because Epson was, they sort of, essentially the original version of the firmware that these Epson machines ran was too similar to NEC's, and so NEC got an injunction against them. However, the later machine that they made, which was released around the same time, or was going to be, with a different boot firmware, that was clean. It did not feature any NEC code, and it was dissimilar enough that NEC did not win an injunction against that model. And so NEC essentially went on the warpath against Epson in the ways that they could, because, like I said, they couldn't get an injunction against Epson, and Epson knew they were in the clear. So what they did was they coded a sneaky check into most versions of DOS from that time, where if it detected an Epson machine based on a string in the NEC machine in the boot ROM that the Epson did not have, it would refuse to boot. So what happened was, you know, there were patches around that, and Epson had their own version of DOS. But the other thing as a result of this is that a lot of PC companies weren't thrilled about this, because there was no real open standard for Japanese computers. So NEC had a total monopoly that they shared with the one company who had the balls to clone their computers. And so NEC and Epson were the only people building PC-98s. And NEC did not want other companies to. And they were kind of being secretive about details of the PC-98 for part of it. So what happened was, also as a result of stagnation, IBM decided we are going to make a version of DOS that works on regular PCs, but it's in Japanese, called DOS-V. And DOS-V caused a huge amount of competition for NEC. They had to cut costs, which is why this machine has a third-party sound card in it for the FM, which is a clone of the original NEC one. But the reason this machine has it is because NEC removed FM from many of the machines that were not multimedia-oriented, as this RA-20 was essentially a business computer. So NEC essentially removed that, and they removed some other stuff and went to using some off-the-shelf PC components later on especially. But the other thing NEC did to compete with the newer computers was they changed the PC-9801 to the PC-9821 and added in 256 color mode. So this computer can do 256 colors in DOS as well as Windows. However, the thing is, the competition was moving fast, and eventually in 1995, though, that's when the death blow was dealt. And that's what I just showed you. Windows for the PC-98. When Windows 95 came out, well, essentially the focus of the PC-98 shifted towards marketing it as the best way to run Windows 95. And eventually, you know, the problem is they cost more to make. Epson, Dell, IBM, Compaq, Sony, Toshiba, Fujitsu, so many companies could sell regular PCs for lower prices than NEC could. And so in 1997, 1998, they announced that they were going to be discontinuing future development of the PC-98 series in favor of the 98 without a dash NX. The 98NX essentially was just a plain old off-the-shelf PC with an NEC logo on it. And NEC lost a bunch of market share too because of killing off the PC-98, but also because of competition. So what did NEC do until they killed off the PC-98 for good? Well, from 1997-98 until 2003, the first thing NEC did was they released a faster version of this computer, the RA20. I think it was like the RA223, RA233, I forget the name of it, but they released a slot 1 version of this motherboard and of this hardware architecture. Literally the same exact thing as in here, but it's slot 1. And then they extended it. Well, they didn't even extend it. They just replaced the slot 1 CPU and changed the BIOS a little. And they replaced the slot 1 CPU with a socket 370 adapter and sold it in faster versions until 2003. So in 2003, you could purchase a PC-98 with a socket 370 CPU and a slot 1 adapter, and it's still using FPM, well, not FPM, EDO, I think, EDO parity SIMs. Imagine EDO parity SIMs in a computer you bought in 2003. PC-98s were something else towards the end. But they made a bunch of these cost-reduced computers for years and years until they finally killed it off. But there's a good reason they made this until 2003. Well, actually two. One is the software, and two is the hardware compatibility with peripherals and floppy drives and all that fun stuff. Because the PC-98 had a dedicated user base. Alright, so the PC-98 was interesting in a lot of ways, and this was because the PC-98 came after the PC, and compatibility was not a goal with the IBM PC. In fact, NEC used this incompatibility to sell millions of these computers throughout multiple generations. And that's the thing with the PC-98. It's not a singular computer like a C64 or Amiga, where most computers have similar specs. No, there were lots of PC-98s sold with improved specs, at least aside from the video hardware, which stagnated a bit. You see, one of the biggest PC-98 design flaws is that the video hardware was very crazy, and it was tied to the hardware itself, so you couldn't upgrade it. If you wanted more colors and there was no explicit provision for upgrading the video, you could not do it. You had to get a brand new PC-98. And it was like this first with the EGC, but later more notoriously with the 9821 and its 256 colors, along with high resolution mode, which was not just a simple high resolution, but a whole different operating mode. It was very weird what NEC did with the PC-98. But the thing is, when better video cards came out, well, you couldn't upgrade them. So what did third-party accessory companies do? They had it so you could plug a video card in and then wire up essentially the old video card's output to the new one and then hook your monitor into that. And so when you loaded Windows, it would switch it over. And this is the same thing NEC did themselves when it came to onboard video. It will actually switch over when you load Windows a newer video chip, in this case a Trident video chip, which is on the same card as the EGC and GDC combo in an ASIC. Literally, that's what NEC did with this machine. I might show it off in another video because this is a very interesting machine architecturally, but the thing is, they just added more video chips. And so they added that whole different video chip from a PC when they needed more colors. That's what NEC did. Interesting, isn't it? So the thing with the PC-98 is because, like I said, they came after the PC, there were a lot of cool features. For example, floppies. Let's go to B. Drive B, which is our floppy drive. Yeah, I said that. Drive B is our floppy drive, because on the PC-98, Drive A is usually whatever device class you booted from, and the first of that. I'm not kidding it. Drive A, if you boot on a PC, is, your floppy drive, but on here, it's your hard drive if you boot from that, but if you boot from a floppy, it's also Drive A. And it gets even more interesting, because if you try to read from a floppy when there's none in there, it doesn't even try to read it. You don't even see the light come on. You hear nothing. And it doesn't even... It's instant. Well, that's because just like a Mac, it reads only when it senses a floppy. So let's put the disk in, and let's push R. Let's type in dir. The light came on for a little bit. It's a bit dim, but as you can see, it read it just like that. And then if I type in dir, it doesn't even try to read it. It only reads it when it senses a disk in there. And the same goes if you're booting it and you don't have a boot device. In fact, I'll even demonstrate it now. Let's go to A, and let's go to run fdisk. So we're going to hit yes. We're going to go to 2, and we're going to change it to non-bootable. And let's back out of here, and let's reset the system, because this one has no reset switch. We have to reset it with Control-Command-Delete, which is what DOS and some TSR's add. And let's do it with the floppy drive out. So it's doing the SCSI check. Okay, so we're at our no boot device screen. Now on a PC, when you get this message, you have to enter. Watch what happens when we do it on a PC-98. I didn't even hit the keyboard, it just did that. Because it'll actually sense when you insert a floppy. And that's a really cool feature of the PC-98 that nobody talks about. And the same goes on the models with a 5 1/4 inch drive. It will not even try reading the disk until you lower the head. And then it'll try booting. But until you lower the head, it doesn't even try reading it or buzzing it. It's crazy how that works, doesn't it? I've heard that it works by sensing something with the ready switch, but that's just how it works. And now we're going to make our drive bootable again, but as you can see, our floppy drive is now A. It's crazy how this works. But here's the thing, if you have a PC-98 with 2 floppy drives and you put it in the second drive, it's B. And your hard disk is always C when you boot from floppy if you have 2 drives. Isn't it crazy how that works? And now I can boot from Windows again. Alright, so let's talk about a few more interesting things about the PC-98 version of DOS. So the first thing is, some of the DOS features that you know and love from the PC version are carried over. For example, the boot menu, where you can basically give it all the menu items in the world that you want. You can still do that here on the 98. So I'm just going to go load VEM486 so I get the most amount of RAM. This unfortunately conflicts with Windows and some programs, which is why it's nice, because you can just reboot and load EMM386 instead. So you do the same thing as you do on regular Windows. You make your menu items, and you also notice the colors are different because of the PC-98's palette. Let's load AutoEXEC, and then you just get whatever you're changing from config.sys or whatever you told it to, and then you load those lines. Pretty nice. So you can have several things ready for games. So let's go and see what it says under mem. So right now we've got 31K available, which means a lot of stuff will run. For example, let's run a popular PC-98 game, and let's run Smart Drive. This speeds up loading times. So you know is a PC-98 game that features one of the things the platform is most known for, and that is the sprite art. So the PC-98, because of its video chip, is well known for having beautiful, beautiful sprite art. And I mean, the sprite art on the PC-98 is absolutely beautiful because you've got a high resolution mixed with 16 colors, and it's 16 from a palette of 4096. So essentially what happens is, You can pick any 16 colors from the palette of 4096 and display them. So a lot of game developers, you know, you had to be good at color theory and dithering to really program this system. So they would program these high-resolution images and just display them. So it wasn't just typical sprite art, but it was this beautiful high-resolution sprite art. And so a lot of PC-98 games had this. And let's click out of the intro. As you can see here, this was a point-and-click game. Let's move the monitor up here and zoom in. You'll also notice the font. And the font is the PC-98 hardware font. Like this font, the reason it's so similar to DOS is because it's actually coming from the ROM. It's coming from the ROM of the system. So most PC-98 games have the same font, English or Japanese. And that's because of how it displays text. It's actually displaying the text from the first GDC, the master GDC, and the graphics are coming from the slave GDC and the GCRG, and if the game uses it, the EGC, depending on if it has different rendering paths. So we're going to back out of this. And here's the image that you would see on a certain PC-98, OS install that was really popular in the Western scene a few years back. Still kind of is. Unfortunately, the sound is very quiet because of the weird sound setup. I'll probably show a different 98 with a better sound chip, or at least better sound card setup for the next video. This is just what I had set up, to be honest. Alright, so one of the interesting things about this platform is also how a lot of games loaded. The first thing is that numerous games want you to use EMM 386 and they don't use protected mode. This is so that they could run on the VX, or because of programming habits from that system. But it's also because a lot of games would also do this thing where they would... This is a BAT file that a PC-98 game uses. It loads the sound driver, which in this case is NAX. There's also FMP and PMD. And there's a few proprietary ones, or ones that were custom internal for each game developer, and probably some more floating around. And then we've got the game exe loading itself, and then it unloads it when the game's done. And the same goes with mouse drivers and all that, so a lot of PC-98 games and programs don't load a mouse driver. Instead, the game loads the mouse driver itself, instead of having to put it in your file like on Windows. And then you load it, you see the sound driver text pop up, and you see your game pop up. Very interesting way of doing things. Now this is a game, from what I can tell, actually uses the EGC. And I'm just going to show off the demo feature of the game just because, you know, I kind of just want to film it instead of try to struggle to play it right now. But this is another interesting PC-98 Dojin game, Flame Zap or Katsujin or whatever. And it's interesting because not only does it run at 60 FPS if you turn that mode on and have a CPU that can handle it. I'm assuming they did it because, like the Doom 3DO port, if you had hardware that was fast enough you could do it. It usually runs at 30. But the game looks pretty impressive for a PC-98 game, and because it's a shmup and has a good soundtrack, of course, people like this game too, though it's pretty hard. But when you look at this in 24 kilohertz, it just looks beautiful. And that's the lasting appeal this has for gaming. And yet at the same time, it's very interesting. You have to stop to actually cancel it for some reason. It's a very interesting platform that had a lot of influence, and as you can see, it didn't clear out the background layer. We still have that score stuck on there. See what I'm talking about with the whole thing with both video chips? Now you see it in action. So the whole thing with the PC-98 that makes it interesting. In fact, okay, CLS cleared it out. But that's the whole interesting part about the PC-98, is just everything about this platform is very interesting. There's a lot of things it does differently than a normal PC, and I could talk for hours about just how different this is. Which is why I made part 1, because I wanted to show off a few interesting hardware features and essentially get a little reason out there for why this is so interesting. I'm probably going to make videos on other topics too, relating to the 98, and including like what keyboard and mouse you use. This is just a bus mouse. This is a special PC-98 keyboard, along with interesting tidbits of the sound system, the video system, and all that fun stuff. I want to talk about this very interesting platform some more. Also, a few tips and tricks on how to actually use it if you get one. So what else can I say? Very interesting platform that I've been getting obsessed with. In fact, I've got 3 PC-98s right here as well. Hold on. Check this out. I've got one right here all hooked up. A PC-9801AN. This actually has a better sound chip. I just don't have my files copied over because I've got to, I put a different hard drive in it. This is an Epson PC-486GR that unfortunately, I'm going to zoom in on here and see if you can see. This is after cleaning out what I saw as corrosion. There's a bit of corrosion that creeped up. This, I think, is the layer of the PCB flaking off, or at least a coating. But that coating or something deteriorated, and it's causing it to just do nothing when I plug it in. So I'm going to have to see if I can use a... I see all these people on the internet telling me, dude, use a ultrasonic cleaner. So I'm going to have to see if that actually does anything. I know contact cleaner didn't do anything, so I might have to try that. Which is a shame because this actually does high resolution and has 2 floppy drives for each media type, 1 for each media type. And then here's the H98 that I've made a video on in the past. And as you can see also, because of... This actually is a good way of demonstrating the whole video issue I talked about with the 256 colors and having to hook up a second video card. See, on this machine, you actually have to hook up a second video card because all you can ever get, unless you hook up the one card and plug it into the other, is 256 colors at 640 by 480. That's all you get. That's literally all you get. But this machine can do higher resolutions because it has a Trident chip in it, as I demonstrated. So, what else can I say? Very interesting computer platform that I've been getting into as of late, the PC-98, and I'm going to have more videos about all the crazy stuff that this thing did. Alright, so that's all that I feel like saying about the PC-98 tonight. I'll probably have more videos on this because I've been getting very into this platform, so that's all that needs to be said. Like, subscribe for more, and I'll probably, consider setting up a PeerTube account somewhere to upload these videos too. But the thing is, this system is worth talking about for multiple videos and also elsewhere because this is a very interesting platform worth getting in depth about because there's a lot of weird games, weird software, and weird features of the system that just aren't talked about anywhere else. That's all that needs to be said. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.